Soundstripe.
And welcome to the premiere episode of Exit Philosophy. My name is Scott MacArthur, and that face in the other part of the screen is the one, the only, longtime Major League Baseball PR man, longtime Major League Baseball columnist. He's done it all over half a century, Richard Griffin.
Half a century, that makes it seem old, which of course is the truth. I mean, we now get into our exit philosophies. So
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, Griff, you've been doing it forever, man. And you and I have taken a road in the last few months, and just to shape where this podcast is going to go. This is going to be a baseball centered podcast. Obviously, we know that a lot of our followers are diehard Blue Jays fans, and so a baseball-centered podcast with a Blue Jays focus. But we thought for episode 1, we'd talk about our love for the game and talk about where we have been and what we've been up to, because both of us have undergone some pretty significant changes in our lives over the last number of months, and it's brought us to here the decision to launch a hobby podcast, talk a little ball.
The history of what's happened to you since you left radio is, I found interesting. I found you staring at the Bay of Fundy or the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not sure which, but the proposal to put together a podcast, which we've now settled on, Exit Philosophy. I was still curious about what got you from talk radio in Toronto to the shores of, I think it was the Bay of Fundy, was it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean in the Halifax area, and beautiful Nova Scotia, so small, relatively speaking, that you can get to the Bay of Fundy from the Halifax Regional Municipality in about an hour. I love to go up to Wolfville, which is where Acadia is located, and they got an amazing farmers market there on Saturdays, and then we often spin off to Fundy and try to hit the low tide so that we can walk on the ocean floor. But Griff, I got sick, and I've been very open about my struggles with mental illness through the years. And I got sick at the end of September, and I had to take some time off. In fact, my intention was to take a Thursday and a Friday off, but my doctor insisted I needed significant time. And as I described to my doctor what I was going through, he said to me, you need to take this time not just to heal, but to figure out what you're going to do next. I think he understood in that 15-minute appointment we had on the Thursday at the end of September that mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was done in my current line of work. And I don't know what it's been like for you over the course of your career. I mean, is it fair to say you've spent about half of your career as a PR guy and half of it as a columnist, mostly for the Toronto Star? I mean, so you've had some different gigs, same sort of broader scope, but some different gigs. I just continually defaulted to being a radio host because that's all I ever knew. But I realized in the last number of months that I don't want to be that anymore, man. I want to enjoy the skill set that I have, but I don't want to grind the way that you have to on a day in and day out basis. And I want to take this skill set, I want to take my passions and focus them in a different direction.
So right now you're in Toronto, but you're going to be spending most of your time in Nova Scotia. But in either case, we can be side by side like this, doing a at least weekly podcast, talking about things that we both love.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing this. If you're listening to this podcast, so we're always going to acknowledge our listeners, understanding that not everybody has the visual. But if you're watching on YouTube, you see the temporary setup behind me. I've got a powder blue 80s style Blue Jays road jersey over one shoulder and a Chicago Cubs half sleeve t-shirt on the other side. I'm in Toronto right now at my home, which I've sold. And the closing date is in mid-July. And effective mid-July, I am moving to beautiful Nova Scotia. And I'd never really spent any time there, Griff. I hadn't been to Nova Scotia before. But I am absolutely repping the East Coast lifestyle, which is an amazing clothing brand. You can, if you're watching, you can see it on my hat as well. And the reason I love the brand isn't just because the clothes are comfortable and the clothes are great. It's because it actually is a lifestyle when you're out there. It's a slower pace. It's an active pace. I have walked and hiked, and yes, there is a difference, more times than I can count. And they always say that East Coasters are lovely people. I can absolutely vouch for that. And so my intention is to move there and to become a permanent guest. I will always be somebody who, as they like to say, has come from away, because I'm not a Nova Scotian. I've come from Ontario, so I've come from away. But my intention is to be a permanent guest. And, you know, where that takes me, where my professional roads go, I don't have all the answers to those questions yet, Griff, but as somebody who has played it safe for all of my life, and I think this is pretty relatable because I think we tend to play things safe and we get caught up in situations that just aren't working for us and we feel stuck. And we also don't feel like we can become unstuck. We don't realize we have the power to become unstuck just by changing our decisions. I am exhilarated by the idea that there are more questions than answers right now. And this podcast, Exit Philosophy, which of course is a play on the exit velocity hitting metric in baseball, but also you and I have exited the mainstream, if you will, the exit philosophy. I'm just really, really excited to see where this podcast goes. And this will be a part of how I spend a chunk of the rest of my life. It's going to be great. When I'm not hosting this podcast with you, Griff, I'll be doing something else. And when I'm not doing something else, if I'm not swimming in the ocean, I'll be staring at it.
You guessed, Scotty, that it was about 50-50 in terms of my professional life in PR and writing. Well, that's pretty damn close. It was 26 years total in baseball PR. I spent 22 years from the 73 season through the 94 season. That was the strike year with the Montreal Expos in PR. And then the strike was devastating to everybody involved, especially in Montreal, where there was a chance to follow up the back-to-back Blue Jays World Series with a third straight Canadian World Series. That was a great team, a great bunch of players, great bunch of guys. And then I went to the Star for 24 years. And then I left the Star when that business started to sort of change in terms of deadlines and requests and online. And people who are watching this podcast will know that we're neither one of us a master of the online. So,
yet we'll become it.
We'll straighten it out as time goes on. But then after I left there, I had an opportunity to join the Blue Jays in their PR and became director of Blue Jays public relations or media relations, baseball media, for 4 years. And I was hoping to hang on until I got a ring, because the only time I came close to a World Series ring other than 94, when the strike ended that dream, was in 81 on Blue Monday. And it took me probably 2 years to even talk to Rick Monday after that. So I took it hard. And now the exit from the Blue Jays led to what I'm doing now, what we're doing now. And I'm providing independent content for myself, writing for myself with griffsthepitch.com, and people watching this can go to griffsthepitch.com, and when we get further along, they'll be able to pick up this podcast as well as all the regular outlets for podcasts. And I have columns and content and power rankings and observations and game coverage on Griff's the Pitch, and I find that very freeing. You know, you talk about being restrained, being sort of told what to do, and there's something really freeing about being in charge of the timing of your content, the quality of your content, the length of your content, the fact that nobody's taking your best 150 words out of a column and you pick up the paper the next day and say, that's not really what I wanted to say. So now we have that opportunity via the podcast and via griffsthepitch.com. And I'm loving it.
Yeah, griffsthepitch.com. Throw Griff a subscription. The content is consistent each and every week, and the podcast is going to be a key element of your weekly content. So YouTube, we expect to be on iTunes and Spotify and all the places you typically get your podcasts very, very soon. Substack, Griff's the Pitch, is another place where you can get the audio version for sure. Are you going to do the video version on Substack as well?
Yes. Yeah. It'll be on there.
We'll link to YouTube or
opportunity. Yes.
Whatever the case may be. You know, at this point in my life, Griff, and like we're talking here, by the way, we should just timestamp this in case you're listening a little bit later down the road. But we're talking here on Monday morning, May the 7th or 8th.
8th, yeah.
Okay, see, there you go. So days of the week don't matter to me right now because I'm unemployed and I'm in the middle of a move. So I don't even really pay attention to any of that stuff. But Monday morning, May the 8th, and you and I, in planning this, we were talking about format and we were talking about approach. And I said two things that sound mutually exclusive, but really aren't. And I mean both. The first is that you can come to this podcast and you'll get unvarnished opinion, and we're not going to hold back. If we like what we see about the Blue Jays, about a particular situation in Major League Baseball, we'll give it to you. If we don't like what we see, we'll give it to you straight up that way. If Griff and I disagree, we're not going to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. I've been asked to do that before, and I'd rather stick a fork in my eye. I'd rather agree if we both agree, disagree if we both disagree. You know, and if we end up coming to near blows on this podcast, well, it's because it's organic and it's real. Our opinions are authentic. And on the flip side, Griff, we will not say anything. We will not say anything on this podcast that we would not say to a manager, a coach, or a player to their face, right? I mean, we're never going to get personal. And if a take sounds ridiculous, you can call us out on that, but you can be sure that if we had to face that player, that coach, or that manager the very next day and answer for what we say, we'd be comfortable doing it.
The greatest advice that anyone ever gave me in my working in baseball for going on 51 years was John McHale, probably when I was 21 or 22 years old. And he said, if you're going to make a career in baseball, all you got to do is love the game and respect everyone that chooses to work in it. Mm-hmm. And that's, to your point, Scotty, if you can't have a take and then the next day go up and face that person and explain yourself or discuss it reasonably, then that's not something that I plan on doing. And to hear you, that's not something that we're planning on doing on Exit Philosophy. So...
Right. And we'll probably end up sharing some stories down the road of encounters that we've had with players or coaches.
How many years, Scotty, did you travel with the Blue Jays full time? 162 games? Was it 3 years?
Richard, I'm not very good at math, Richard. You're going to get some of that too. I'll just break out into Gibby every now and then. 162 times 2, it's difficult. And 162 times 3, it's another 162. I did 3 full seasons, 2013, 2014, and 2015, doing the full 162. And then in 2016, the travel got cut enough that I think I only did the season opening. I think they started on the road that year. The season opening road series, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was in Tampa Bay. Don't sue me if I'm incorrect. My memory's starting to go. And I was at the trade deadline, which might have been in Houston. 2014's trade deadline certainly was in Houston, because that was the Casey Janssen, Jose Bautista, tear down the entire organization for not going and getting the team help. But 2016 might have also been in Houston. Anyway, I'm digressing way past the point. But 3 full seasons plus 2016 with a reduced schedule. Playoffs as well. Was in Texas, was in Cleveland for the DS and ALCS. So I had a bit of background with Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, as well as Alex Anthopoulos and John Gibbons through the first 3 years of my time covering the team.
And one thing with the background that each of us have on this Blue Jays situation is that we made different opinions of what the turning point was in terms of the Blue Jays considering themselves small market to now where everybody's looking at them, including the Boston Red Sox, and saying, how do we compete against that? They're spending so much money. But I think you mentioned the 2014 All-Star break with Casey Janssen and Jose Bautista. Just looking back, I haven't thought about that in a while, but that sort of was a turning point for Blue Jays management in terms of, let's get off our asses and do something here. We got talent on this team and we can add to it and still survive. And the way to bring people into the ballpark, you have to spend money sometimes, especially in a city that expects winning situations, maybe not so much in hockey, but in other sports. And yeah, so that 2014 All-Star break was huge.
Well, and Griff, I mean, let's fast forward it to today. And let's begin in the first podcast, making at least one person who's listening or watching roll their eyes. What has Alex Anthopoulos, the world champion, done in Atlanta? He's locked up every valuable young piece that franchise has. I mean, run down the list. Acuna, Albies, on and on. I mean, Olsen's not young, and he's the replacement for Freddie Freeman, but he's locked into an extremely long-term deal. I mean, they have got all their pieces. You can... not 1 through 9, but probably 6 or 7 of those 9 in that 9-player order every day. You, provided there's health, you can probably draw up most of the Atlanta Braves batting order for the next half decade at least. And the Blue Jays are coming up, and I know that Bo Bichette has signed through the rest of his arbitration, but the Blue Jays are coming up on the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. situation, and you can play this year by year for a couple of more off seasons if you want, but then you're getting into pretty muddy territory. And Vladdy, with all that hullabaloo around the Yankees, and I'll never play there, and that's tied to Vlad Sr., I'm sure, because it sounded extremely personal. Vlad has said, I want to be here, number one. Number two, he's also defecated all over the New York Yankees, the team that the Blue Jays, or at least it felt like the Blue Jays and others, were a feeder system for when their really good players became too expensive. So he's telling you he wants to stay, and he's telling you he's not going to New York. He has essentially said, Toronto, I'm yours. Organization, I'm yours if you want me. He's got all the leverage here, Griff. They have to come through. This player cannot walk because they can't be considered big market if they can't keep an elite young talent long-term through his prime years, when he's already told everybody who's willing to listen, and that's all of us, that he wants to stay.
And Scotty, in comparing what Anthopoulos has done with the Braves, you can't even include Bo in that. As you point out, he's only signed for 3 years through the end of his arbitration into his free agency. So that makes him no different in terms of years of service of control than Vlad. So the only thing is that Bo is protected in case he gets long-term injury. Vlad isn't at this point. But they are going to have to sign both those guys. And to your point, they're going to have to sign Vlad Guerrero Jr. before they even get around to discussing a contract with Matt Chapman. They can't sign Matt Chapman and not have Vlad and Bo under contract. So if you're looking for why are they waiting this long on Vlad, there's no real problem with waiting this long, but there will be a problem if they try and go out and sign Matt Chapman and leave Vlad still hanging. So look for something early this offseason or maybe later this season in terms of a Vlad long-term deal. And it won't be just for the final 2 years of his contract into free agency. It will be something significant.
Right. And remember, you got Ryu coming off the books after this season, and you've got, we're projecting forward here. I mean, Kevin Gausman's in the second year of a 5-year deal. So when the contract, the hypothetical contract for Vladdy really kicks into high gear because you enter the free agency years beyond arbitration, Gausman's in the final year of his contract, right? And Chris Bassett's on a relatively short-term contract as well. Like all of this stuff is just going to continue to churn, and they feel like an organization that is now playing as a big fish in the bigger waters, and they've got a couple of boxes to check before we can formally say that. But I trust that this is going to get done, and I trust that there isn't going to be a crap ton of drama surrounding it, because Vladdy is one of the top players in the game, Griff, and there are plenty of contracts that have been signed in terms of both years and dollar figures that should set the mark for Vladdy to fall into. And this is a guy who doesn't just hit the crap out of the baseball. He's also one hell of a first baseman, a Gold Glove winner who I think is a better first baseman this year, coming off of his Gold Glove last year.
Yeah, he's a legit Gold Glove winner, and I didn't think that he would win it last year because it takes a while for people to get over, and the voting is done by and large by coaches and managers, so it takes them a while to realize. But they realized last year how good Vlad was, and as you point out, he's getting even better now. In terms of Vlad not wanting to go to New York, I spent 4 years from his rookie season in 2019 through last year going to New York. And Vlad hated being in New York in terms of being at the ballpark. There was a ritual, the first game of every series in New York at Yankee Stadium, where he would have to go to the dugout because there was like 5, 6, 7 Spanish-speaking radio stations and TV stations that wanted an exclusive interview with Vlad, and they wouldn't just throw their microphones in like North American media does and share quotes. They would have to be sitting with Vlad. So it would be a steady procession, one after another, same questions, sitting on the back of the dugout, getting their little iPhone interview with Vlad. And I think that's part of what he hated. And the fact that they compare him to his father, they ripped him at the All-Star game. The year that he was in the home run derby and hit 94 off John Schneider. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, and I'm sure that's just scraping the surface of reasons why he wouldn't want to play in New York for the Yankees. And I mean, whatever the Yankees were going to offer, the Blue Jays would be able to match because he's their guy. You're paying him not just for the next 7 years, you're paying him for what he's done in the past too. And the Yankees can't say that. Only the Blue Jays can say that. Plus, something that a lot of people don't consider, you look at the player development complex that they spent, $300 million on, and then the outfield and renovations that they spent another $300 million on. And when that's done, where are they going to spend that money? They
Right.
better
Well,
be
then the
spending it
infield,
on payroll.
the
Yeah,
infield renovations to come.
that's
Yeah.
the second half of
Yeah.
the total.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're going to have money to spend that they were spending on facilities, and the facilities are so good, especially the spring training one, that it's an attraction for luring free agents. So you've got Canada and crossing the border and taxes, the old bugaboos about playing in Canada. But then you go down and you see that complex, and you go, God, you know, I can live here and work out here and spend the rest of my career here. And so that's an investment not only in spring training, but in the major league club in Toronto as well. And
Well,
they're going to have that money to spend.
well, Griffin, and you know, I mean, a lot of ball players are from high tax states, right? Like, how many big league ball players are from California? But if you make your permanent residency in Florida, and that means you've got to live there X number of days a year, which means you're there all winter, and you've got this first class facility. Mark Shapiro used to talk about this before the shovels were even in the ground. And I remember, I guess I was being a bit of a dick about it, but I remember saying to him, I'm like, Mark, and this was after the microphones had gone off. I'm like, Mark, you know that fans up in Toronto don't give a crap about the facility down here in Dunedin. They're not, because the team was losing at that point, right? It's 2017, 2018. They're not interested in workout facilities. They're interested in the product on the field. You know how that's going to pay off. You know why that's going to pay off, but it ain't paying off right now. We're finally at that point where we're seeing it. So you set up your permanent residency for tax purposes in Florida. You live in the good weather in the winter, and you've got a kick-ass facility that you can eat at, you can work out at, as you said, Griff, all winter long. Oh, spring training's there too, so I can live in my house or live in my apartment. My spouse or partner and our kids are all set up. It works. And then you bring them to Toronto temporarily during the season.
The first I learned about that was writing the media guide in Montreal, and there was one star player that I said, it says you live in Florida. Where in Florida? And he just started to laugh and couldn't stop laughing. It was just an address, you know. He lived
Pointed a dot on the map
yeah.
there.
But yeah, throw a dart at the map. But the other thing about not having personal income taxes in Florida is that I think that DeSantis is getting rid of all the libraries, so you know they don't need as much money in terms of facilities. And I think we're running out of time here on episode 1. Scotty, we got a couple more minutes, so you got anything special we need to wrap up?
Well, I just this is a conversation, Griff, that I think we need to have in longer form. But you and I are both personal friends of Marley Rivera. So I want to declare that bias, if that's the appropriate word for it, before we get into it for a few minutes here. But based on what Andrew Marchand wrote about Marley's firing at the hands of ESPN and the apparent involvement of, or potential involvement or pressure from Major League Baseball in making this happen. What happened, to just quickly frame it, is Marley had a one-on-one interview set up with a player. And you should know that Marley Rivera is one of the top reporters in this sport. And she does it at an elite level in 2 languages. Spanish is her first language. English is her second language, although you'd never know it. She's elite at both. Her relationship with the Latin players and the people with influence over the Latin players, unmatched in this game. And she had a sit down prepared with a player at Yankee Stadium. Was it Yankee Stadium? Anyway, it was involving the Yankees about a week and a half ago. And a fellow reporter on a freelance basis kind of waded into what was to be a one-on-one, and Marley had some choice words for that individual that were caught on tape. And as a result, she was fired by ESPN. But as Andrew Marchand reported, the freelance reporter that Marley was speaking to is married to somebody high up in the Major League Baseball communications department. And so there is allegation, there is belief that Marley's sort of sandpaper relationship, which a reporter should have, it shouldn't be cozy and lovey-dovey, but sort of frictional relationship with Major League Baseball at times contributed to their overreaction. And now she is on the outside looking in, but I would presume not for long, because you'd be stupid not to snap her up.
I have been on both sides of it with a team, obviously, as we've discussed, and in media. And as you point out, she is one of the best in terms of doing her job as a reporter. And I've seen from both sides, I've seen fights and pushing matches and, screaming matches between members of the media. And usually when it happened with the Blue Jays when I was there, and you call the person aside, you receive the complaint, call the person aside, warn them that this is not good and it's not a good situation and it could lead to something else, but you don't fire them on the spot. And what I found difficult is that she's a member of the Baseball Writers Association of America, which is supposed to protect its members. And we haven't heard a peep from the BBWAA in terms of how do you allow, and granted, she was working for ESPN, which is primarily television, but she's also writes a lot of stuff for ESPN.com and feature stuff, and is very good at that. But I just don't see how she wasn't protected, how that was allowed to happen. And like you said, I mean, we've both spoken to her. She's planning on taking a little time off and then getting back into it somehow, but I just don't think that should have happened at all. And we'll talk about it in future episodes as this progresses. But it's something we both felt strongly about that we needed to talk about in the first episode of Exit Philosophy.
So we'll put a wrap on it here, Griff. I think our goal for this show is to keep it in a relatively manageable range. We know that you typically listen to podcasts as you're in rush hour on the way to work. You might be catching us on the treadmill. You might be out for a walk. And some of my favorite podcasts actually run into the 2 or 3 hour range, and I only end up hearing snippets, just because you can't dedicate that much time. So we're going to look to be in the 35 to 45 minute range each and every week. We're going to record on Mondays. We're going to try to pump this out on Mondays. We are not the most technically sound, so we're going to give ourselves a little bit of grace coming out of the gate here. We have recorded on Monday, May the 8th. We hope to have it for you on Monday, May the 8th. If not, it'll be Tuesday the 9th, Wednesday the 10th. We've tried to keep this one timeless and broad so that we're not doing the nitpicky. The Jays got swept at Fenway and then went to Pittsburgh and swept the Pirates and get into the nitty-gritty details. But you're going to get Blue Jays. You're going to get baseball. You're going to get opinion. And we're just two pals. We're just two pals talking baseball with our exit philosophy. We're out of the mainstream. We're out of to give, and we're going to bring it to you honestly. Bring it to you honestly, and we hope that you subscribe once we figure out how to get you to subscribe. We hope you subscribe, and we hope you enjoy it. We hope we can be a part of your week each and every week.
Great, Scotty. Honesty is the key, and as you mentioned before, that's we're going to keep it real and keep it going and have fun. So I enjoyed it, Scott. Thanks for hosting, and we'll try and do it again ASAP.
Look forward to talking to you each and every week through the ball season and beyond. Thanks for listening.